Okay, here we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so we're just going to go through the questions that were posted on Facebook in both Jen's and my group initially, just so that we make sure that we cover everything that has been asked. Jen, do you want to start with yours, or?
I don't mind. Yep, I can. Okay. Carol, why would progesterone shorten periods and give improved mood, yet still cause bloating and other PMS symptoms?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to define bloating. What are
Yes,
people? What are they talking about when they say bloating? And it goes in either direction. It goes to they're getting water retention, fluid retention, the fingers swell up, their feet swell up, and women call that bloating. But there's also the stomach bloating when your stomach distends. So it's important to be clear about what sort of bloating you're talking about, because it's two different things. Progesterone, when it's in doses adequate enough, will be a diuretic and relieve your body of the extra fluid it's hanging on to. High estrogen promotes fluid retention. I did see somebody on a Facebook group complain they started progesterone and then they had to pee all the time. You can expect that in your first doses if you're using enough. And if you're still having that water retention kind of swelling, you're not using enough progesterone to get there. The other is bloating in the gut. And this is something many women experience every month, some bloating with their menstrual cycle. And it's a time where your gut flora will potentially change a bit in response to progesterone. Likely, the progesterone does allow Candida to flourish. There was a lot of work done some years ago. William Crook was the doctor that I connected with. He wrote about the yeast connection, the yeast syndrome, and the woman, particularly about that kind of bloating that occurs every month. Now, you can get that same effect if you're postmenopausal and you really need progesterone and you start progesterone and your gut is disordered, you're going to need to address your microbiome to monitor that. I looked for some time like why progesterone might be related to this overgrowth of Candida. And I found two reasons. One is Candida, a flourishing of Candida can make your blood sugar low. And the progesterone works towards stabilizing your blood sugar, blood glucose. And as that's coming up, your Candida colonies in your gut have access to even more nutrient. In a petri dish, a fed yeast colony will grow like 1,000 times in a day. So imagine what can be happening in your gut. The other thing is there are some immune molecules, and I've never memorized what they had to be, but during a pregnancy, progesterone actually diminishes some of your immune proteins so that you are allowed to carry a alien creature in your body and not expel it. The same diminution of those immune molecules does allow Candida to flourish. There may be other mechanisms. I haven't found them.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Right. So the next one is, can estrogen kickback occur in someone with no pituitary function?
Yes. So for the ovarian cycle, we're dependent on LH and FSH cycling to, particularly LH, to signal the surge of progesterone during the menstrual cycle. However, even after we stop cycling, we still have hormone factories. And after menopause, what happens more often is DHEA in our skin, in our fat cells, is creating estrogen intracellularly. We can't measure this unless it's coming out into the serum for a while. Inside each and every cell, fat cell, skin cell, you have a hormone factory going on too. And this is particularly producing estrone over estradiol. Now, estrone's a weaker estrogen, but you still can be loaded with estrone under certain circumstances. And I've seen that. I saw a blood test for a Premarin user. 50% of Premarin is estrone. So they continued to measure estradiol, and her doctor would tell her she's not got enough estrogen. And I said, well, please measure total estrogens and measure estrone. Her estrone was sky high. So all the time she was being told she has no estrogen. Now, pituitary dysfunction, this is near to my heart because that's what had been going on with me, low pituitary function. And so you can investigate like what's going on with your pituitary, or you can support the downline hormones. You can support your thyroid, you can support your sex hormones, you can support your adrenal hormones, which is what I've done for myself.
Could, as an extra add-on to that, the chemical menopause,
like
that affects pituitary function, doesn't it?
Yes. Yep. You're totally flatlining your stimulation to your adrenals, to your ovaries intentionally. You flatten that. So somebody with no pituitary function is very similar to that. And then once I worked with a pharmacist who is encouraging women to try these gonadotropin blockers, as they're called, and said, go get an injection of that. And if you want to know what your menopause is going to feel like, or if you have surgery, if you're thinking about surgery, go do that first. And maybe you're going to rethink your decision, what the no hormone situation feels like. I thought it was kind of
yeah, that's very interesting because you know, people sort of start to say, oh, I don't understand why I feel so exhausted. And I obviously I've made the link because it's a pituitary issue that's also affecting thyroid function, and that's why you're going to end up feeling very exhausted.
And adrenal.
And adrenal, yeah. Gemma, did you have the chemical menopause before you had
yours? But I suppressed my cycle for a month, and then I continued cycling.
Even on it?
Yeah. For 11 months afterwards.
Wow.
Wow.
I had it in my late 20s for endometriosis, and it was a short-term thing. I was never offered ADBAC. But yeah, you know, as you say, Carol, it's one of those things that if you want to know what your menopause is going to be like, and it almost instantly I started with the hot flashes. And I mean, had I known about progesterone back then, I think I probably would have, you know, downlined it into my system if I could get hold of it. But no one ever suggested that endometriosis was it was an estrogen dominant condition to me. And it wasn't until many years later, in my late 40s, that somebody posted on a Facebook group that that's what it was. And it was like a light bulb went on.
Yeah.
Everything in my reproductive cycle made sense after that. And but there's so many, you know, you hear people say, oh, my doctor's given me this injection because it stops progesterone production. and you just find yourself shaking your head, because it's actually a cancer drug designed for estrogen receptor positive cancers and prostate cancers. And yet we've got doctors telling women that their issue is progesterone, and that this chemical is there to stop progesterone production, not telling them that actually it stops estrogen as well, and estrogen's the issue. So there's a lot of misinformation around it, I would say.
Yeah, and I never, to be honest, I would have never have considered thyroid either. So that's a good consideration.
Yeah.
Really, I'm thinking.
I think I found one study, and I don't think I ever posted it to the group. I think I sent it to a friend who was on it at the time, who has thyroid issues, and also tibolone, which is often given with the chemical menopause, and that also affects thyroid function because it's highly androgenic, and it's a really it's quite an emotive thing on groups to say, I don't think you need the estrogen add back. Just try progesterone first, because it's completely foreign to anything that any consultant would tell you.
But you've had a few, haven't you, that have done well on chemical menopause and progesterone only?
Yeah, I mean, one girl who's become a really good friend, she got her PMDD came at a time when she went on the birth control pill, and she would call me, message me, that's it, I'm in a field, I'm going to kill myself, I can't do this any longer, and we managed to get her onto the chemical menopause, and which, it's not ideal. And I said, look, just try progesterone. And she was really, really stable for a long time, but her consultant insisted upon a bone mineral scan, because of course this drug is going to give you osteoporosis, and she had the bone mineral scan and her bones were fine. And I was like, well, that's a big FU, isn't it, to your consultant, who basically told you that you needed estrogen to protect your bones. But I mean, what do you think, Carol, about the chemical menopause and the just taking progesterone?
Well, rather than adding back estrogen, that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Because that's where women do find some relief, is they're getting relief from the high amount of estrogen activity, however it's being produced. So it gives them some relief for that. But then how often do the doctors just give them more estrogen? It just blows me away.
I mean, literally, women are being started on the injection, and they're given the estrogen before they even walk out of the door, having had their first injection.
But then having said that, because you've blocked it entirely, they do need some estrogen. They can't function very well without some. It's just the amount, and then it's being unbalanced still with no progesterone. And then they don't consider testosterone either. They've knocked out all your testosterone. So what about that? It's so important to the integrity of your body. Testosterone's in charge of all protein metabolism. It's a signaler for that. So to maintain your body integrity, your bone mass, and all your immune function, our proteins, you need testosterone. So now you've just wiped that out. So on top of that, with giving the estrogen, now you increase sex hormone binding globulin, which elevates when you're estrogen dominant, and it preferentially binds to your androgens, even though you might have some or you might not. Those androgen hormones, testosterone, DHT, DHEA, all get taken up by excessive sex hormone binding globulin. So now you're in a quandary with that. So you've really shifted a lot of things in a bad direction.
So long term, it's not a great thing, is it?
No. And consider this: you could take the injection, or you could use more progesterone. Why would you take the injection?
Unfortunately, worldwide, I think that because there's such little progesterone knowledge, we just can't get enough of it. Like this same girl that I just told you about that's on the injection, her consultant would only give her 200 milligrams because, just because. And I said, look, mention Dr. Katerina Dalton and the fact that she was giving 800 milligrams. And I listened into the call with her, and he said, oh yes, I've heard of Dr. Dalton, but progesterone isn't proven to help PMDD. And I was like, you know,
Oh, yeah,
so
she published exactly that.
yeah. But the most that he would give her was 200 milligrams. So she, in a sense, she essentially has to be on the chemical menopause because she can't oppose her estrogen when she's not. So
Yeah.
bless. Right. Somebody else has said something along the lines of progesterone in the treatment of bipolar, ADHD, and schizophrenia.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say about that one?
Yes, actually, on my website, can I get my website up?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to talk about Doris King. And one woman I know from New York City, she said, you've got to check out her book. And it's on bipolar and progesterone. But I had known that. We had the daughter of a physician was diagnosed as being bipolar, and we recommended 100 milligrams oral progesterone 4 times a day. Absolutely, just did it for her. Doris King, and she's on my website, the wellnessbydesignproject.com. Got 2 interviews with her. She's amazingly eloquent. And she had been diagnosed with bipolar, schizophrenia. She had insulin shock. She'd been institutionalized. And she finally came across John Lee's work and realized pretty quickly that she needed more than John Lee was recommending, and did that. And she now does coaching for mental diseases and progesterone. One of the things, like,
Wow.
bipolar.
Wow.
Yeah, bipolar. Actually, I was flying from Panama, David, to Panama City, and there was a couple, an older man and a younger woman, were on my flight. And as it turned out, the older man sat right next to me, and his partner across the aisle. So he starts chatting me up, and he said he's an author and he's writing a book, and he has this relationship that's not his daughter, it's his girlfriend, and he was writing a book about the whole thing, and he was on the last chapter because they were breaking up. And he said they were breaking up because she was bipolar. And I go, well, she doesn't have to be bipolar. And truly, she did it for the bipolar stuff. That's what I just recommended, some relatively high doses of progesterone. I threw in a little lithium for her because it's also good for your brain. And the relationship, well, now they're apart, but they're still in communication, but they were together for many, many more years. I've kept in touch with them. It's absolutely astounding. So you don't have to have it. You don't have to have schizophrenia. Now, when you talk about schizophrenia, I would also keep in mind there's a big gut component with schizophrenia. There's a big adrenaline component. Schizophrenia patients have high adrenaline. So what balances adrenaline? We also have progesterone to balance adrenaline. So there's that piece. There's a piece of, there's faulty metabolism of adrenaline going on in schizophrenic patients. And they've been using.
Yeah, Dr. Platt, is it Dr. Platt that writes about that as well?
Yes. And in Canada, Abe Hoffer wrote a lot about schizophrenia and using a lot of vitamin C and NAD. Something to think about, because what about that NAD? All your hormones require a enzyme and a cofactor to go from one hormone to another, and that whole cascade of hormones we make from cholesterol. What's a common denominator? There's an enzyme that uses that very piece of NAD to be metabolizing your hormones. So,
and is that vitamin B3 that contributes to that, isn't it?
Exactly.
Niacinamide.
Yes. Yep. Or niacin or niacinamide. nicotinic acid, you might see it indicated at. So what's that doing? That's helping you metabolize all your hormones in the proper function if you're low. Actually, I can send this to you. We were speaking about drugs briefly before we started, and one time I heard a really great lecture about detoxifying heroin with really high doses of vitamin C. And the presenter said, by high doses, he said, I'm talking about like 1/4 pound a day. And he said, I'm dead serious. So I looked up vitamin C in detoxifying drugs like the benzos, okay, to see if it would also have an application there. And I did find a case, this is one case study, and it was rapid detoxification. I think the benzo was Klonopin, and what they included was NAD and vitamin C in large doses, and got this particular patient off of the drug pretty fast. So I'll send that over if you'd like to post.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
Georgie Dinkoff writes a lot about NAD and all that sort of stuff on his website as well.
You can have NAD infusions as well, can't you?
Yes. Now I wonder when you open that door, if not everything that we're calling mental diseases is somehow tied into a hormone component that's unbalanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Dr. Broder Barnes and Dr. Mark Starr write about how thyroid, especially, and the lack of our ability to produce it or convert it, does enormous things for metabolism and physiology.
Yeah.
Right, so next one. Oh, you've talked about Candida, which is great. So can we talk about the phenomenon of some people complain about when they take large doses of progesterone, upwards of 1,000 milligrams a day? It makes them feel really low and flat and depressed.
Okay, I think there's probably some issue with estrogen going on there. Dr. Phyllis Bronson kind of talks about, you look to estrogen for an antidepressant effect, you look to progesterone for anti-anxiety effect, but tied into there too, when you're talking about depression, I'd also look to what's going on in the thyroid. So that would be a case where I'd want to look into that particular patient's whole circumstances, and we can have issues with food, we can have other issues that are pouring into that, and for example, if they also happen to be on like an SSRI at the same time, you could have a flat affect. So you really need to go into what exactly is going on, and when does the depression occur, and how frequently. My experience has been it's a good antidepressant too. Women have been suicidal, and you can just pull them right out of that suicidal affect with progesterone. So are we calling that antidepressant effect as well? So there's another possibility. Maybe they haven't reached enough progesterone for their use. We don't know. And we're having to talk about these large doses of progesterone. And I think we need to not make those numbers scary, because you don't always absorb everything. The only time that you're ensured that you get full absorption is if you would inject progesterone. Otherwise, some percentage is lost of whatever thing you do. And it's all based on your own body, your own metabolism. So let's say you were a good absorber of a cream, and maybe a couple 100 milligrams, you're at where you need. Maybe you're not, and you really have to cover a bigger portion of your body with more progesterone to get it in to do something. David,
I wondered if the T3 component was part of it as well. And you mentioned about the thyroid, because Dr. Pete, I think it is, mentioned in a lecture that I heard from him about how progesterone can take the role of thyroid hormone, but also thyroid, especially T3 and progesterone, are needed to work in synergy together. So if we have a hypothyroid state, is it possible that that the lack of T3 is obviously causing the depression?
Right, there could be that component in there too, and really you really need to look at it. Dr. Pete once said, if you look at the list of things that antagonize your thyroid, it's a list as long as your arm. He said, what supports your thyroid? He goes, only 3 things: pregnenolone, progesterone, and coconut oil. So I thought, well, this is really curious. You know, it's like one of those children's thing. What doesn't belong here, right? Why coconut oil? And then we think about coconut oil, we are always thinking about short chain fatty acids in there. Well, I did a little deeper dive in coconut oil, and what does it have? It has steroidal type compounds. It's like phytoestrogens, or just derivatives of the cholesterol molecule, the plant-based kind of cholesterol molecule is in there. So that steroid configuration is very generous in coconut oil, yet we never think about it. And then you can bring in all the adaptogenic herbs. If you see the name of something like ginsengiside, OSIDE at the end, that means it's got that steroid 4-ring nucleus from that plant. Those, we call them adaptogens, but they have the configuration to fit in our hormone receptors and produce some activity. Wow. So it was 20 years before I figured that out, from a chance encounter with a guy who had a ginseng product. And it was like a light bulb went off, just like you were saying, Jen. Go, wow, this makes so much sense. So when you look at products, if they are anywhere in adaptogenic, they're going to have some of these components with the 4 rings inside that plant. So it's kind of, and we can use them. One of my favorite adaptogens is licorice, to help you restore your adrenals. Why do I like it? Because like a cup of licorice tea is enormously beneficial to your adrenals and really can pull you out of a slump. So I like it because it's readily available. You can get it in grocery stores. It's effective. It's cheap. So people have access to it. The only caveat is not to overuse it, because it has a pressor effect for your blood pressure. But if you are in a slump, going for a cup of licorice tea and relaxing, use a little more salt, you can have enormous recovery.
Wow.
That is pretty wow. I wish I liked licorice.
I know, and in Europe, not in the US, not in Canada, they like licorice candy with salt on.
Oh wow.
And
see, I can handle licorice candy, but I assume that's got quite a few extras in it that probably aren't very good for you.
Yeah, you have to really look hard, because they like to put wheat in those candies too, and I don't like the wheat. But you can find like some pure products with salt if you look hard.
Yeah.
So that was really my last question. So over to you, Gemma.
Okay. I read recently that the birth control pill, as well as reducing testosterone, also reduces oxytocin, reduces libido, causes depression, and reduces cognitive ability. Because it technically shuts down the ovaries, does that mean that those of us with no ovaries should consider oxytocin supplementation?
Yes. Yes. The trouble is it's expensive, and it's poorly absorbed. So you need to do injectable. There have been some compounding pharmacies that have been doing lozenges, and it restores like your sexual interest, restores orgasm, for instance. But Dr. Terry Hertog likes to talk about oxytocin. He tells about his daughter who was getting bullied at school, low self-confidence, and he gave her oxytocin lozenges, and suddenly her whole demeanor changes. She's self-confident and no bullying. Oxytocin also has a lovely component. There is a doctor, his name is Forrest Tennant. He used to be at one point the president of the American Pain Association. And he has some lovely monographs on his website about the various hormones that help treat pain. Or if you are low in these hormones, you have a painful situation, and restoring that hormone will bring that back. And oxytocin relieves pain.
Wow.
That's so interesting.
I'm sure I also saw something the other day that said your partner releases a ton of oxytocin after sex, and you as a female absorb it from your partner. So that's quite interesting as well. Should women in surgical menopause with a history of PCOS supplement testosterone?
They're in surgical menopause now? Okay, so they 50% of your body's production of testosterone comes from your ovaries. So immediately you've lost that. So when replenishing testosterone, I would want to say like doses I've seen in like cream forms that were compounded. If you still had your ovaries, maybe 1 milligram or 5 milligrams seemed to be adequate for a lot of women. If you had no ovaries, we were going to 10 to 25 milligrams of testosterone as a supplement, just to illustrate how big that difference is, how much more you need it with no ovaries. So it's a really important, you still have testosterone being produced, but it's through your adrenals, through the DHEA molecules. So you're not without testosterone, but you've lost a lot. So you should put that back in. Now, historically with PCOS, what's that look like? It's high androgens. It's either high testosterone from the ovaries or high DHEA from the adrenals. It can be one or the other. It can be some combination of both. What's driving that is really no progesterone. LH is a pituitary hormone that's pushing that, and it's pushing your body to make progesterone, and you can't do it for some reason or another. What the reason you can't make it is not very clear, but you're not making it, and you need to add progesterone to help that balance, to stop the excessive LH stimulation. So that will even out your androgens. So in the case of the adrenal DHEA type of PCOS, hydrocortisone could be used too, or you can use progesterone for both, because progesterone can be converted into hydrocortisone. Where she is now with the history of PCOS, that whole thing, I think you have to look to the diet as the instigator of this hormone imbalance. If insulin glucose regulation is a fundamental piece of the treatment. What do they do for young girls with PCOS? If you're at university, they just pop you on metformin to address the insulin glucose. So that's what should be addressed. Everybody has that in their power to address their diet. So with the history of PCOS, you're looking maybe at a history of insulin resistance, and that's where you need to focus your attention to for this period in time. But you can also consider having some testosterone replacement, and that should help your blood sugar as well. So really,
would berberine be a good herb to take?
alternative, yes. Berberine is helpful, but it's also a crutch. What you're putting in your mouth and how you're eating is the fundamental issue.
Yeah.
And if
What
you're
about-
not using enough progesterone, will that aggravate insulin resistance?
Yes. Yes. In that you still have all this estrogen and adrenaline excess,
Yeah.
and you're pushing toward this imbalance, lower blood sugars, higher dependence on insulin, excess insulin being produced and not being effective. It's fundamentally insulin resistance, or as they call metabolic syndrome, is rampant. This is underlying a lot of things. Years ago, I read that insulin and glucose, and I believe this firmly, in evolution, it's the first hormones to show up. And so they're the strongest in your body. So we play a lot with the sex hormones, but we really need to go backwards to thyroid and adrenal hormones and insulin, glucose to get a handle on what's going on with an individual. Katerina Dalton recognized this insulin glucose thing way back when. She was asking her PMS patients to eat every 3 hours. Now, it used to be a common years ago, even let's say eat carbohydrates for low blood glucose. It used to be the thing. And so you really did have to eat every 3 hours, because your blood sugar would be dropping rapidly after that point, and giving some stability to those blood sugar swings help the PMSers. Today, we have a different philosophy where I always recommend that when you eat, that you make sure you have a carb, a fat, and a protein, all three, more like the zone diet. I think we probably have our own individual zones, but if you want to stabilize your blood sugar, make sure you have all three things there for a more even blood sugar experience.
Yeah, definitely. How would you, just to butt in on the testosterone question, a girlfriend of mine finds it difficult to take testosterone. She gets very estrogenic reactions, even taking small amounts. She's in surgical menopause. Can you address any that sort of pathology, the way that happens?
So can you say what exactly she experiences?
Rages, crying.
Okay. Okay.
In her words, losing my shit.
Testosterone seems to be able to do that. There's some rage associated with high testosterone, but is it the testosterone itself, or is it the lack of balance with progesterone?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think she'll find if she uses enough progesterone, she wouldn't have that. But let me say another thing about testosterone. How many times have women added testosterone and they say, I'm breaking out, I'm having acne and pimples on the face. So what are they told to do? They're told to stop the testosterone. So I kind of flip it in my mind and say, what's testosterone doing? All of a sudden you've put this hormone back, it's improving your immune system, you're a carrier of chronic this and that infections, and all of a sudden your immune system's working better, and you're killing off things, and you have debris from the stuff you're killing off. So if you don't have your elimination channels open, your skin acts as a detoxifier for those things, and it's coming through. So let's consider that this could be a positive sign that now you have improved your immune system. Now, what do you do about that? You could take a little less and maybe slow the process, or every single woman I ever asked this question with the eruptions through their skin, I say, are you constipated? And guess what? All of them. I haven't met somebody who said they had no problem with elimination. They're saying, yeah, and it's even worse, and this and that. So you have to have that channel of elimination open. So while your testosterone is helping you kill off things, you have a way to get rid of the cellular debris that you don't want having going through your skin. So another technique you could use, just make sure you've got your digestive tract moving.
Yeah.
Circle,
It is actually
circle,
common
circle.
to see. It is actually common to see that happen, but gradually ease off over a period of time. So they will have initial outbreak, but then that will decrease over time.
Right, expectedly so. As your immune system gets into better control of your body, you don't have to be killing off things all the time. It's this transition period, which is putting you in a much stronger immune system resilience phase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have low blood estradiol and have been taking a therapeutic dose of progesterone for 18 months plus, do you reach a saturation point where you become progesterone dominant in relation to total body estrogen and start to suffer symptoms of excess?
What do you think an excess symptom would be? That's a good question. It does come up. I've had it come up, and particularly because, first of all, you take an estradiol test and it's low, and people think the test is the test, that somehow they're that level of estrogen in your blood, and it stays that way till you take your next blood draw, right? So 6 months ago, I had estradiol very, very low, and it must still be low all this time. Nothing is further from the truth. Your estradiol varies a lot. If you took another serum sample 5 minutes later, you'd have an entire different picture. What would you do with that? Storing of hormones just does not happen. Bioidentical hormones are often criticized because they're no good, because your body does not store them. When you use hormones, your body uses it very quickly.
Yeah.
The levels go down. It's either going to the tissue to do what you want, or it's excreted. So very short duration. So there's no such thing as this, oh, I have to wait for my progesterone to build up, for example. No, it's not ever going to do that. Will your body work more efficiently maybe after a time? Maybe you have better correction of progesterone receptor activity. It becomes more and more efficient. That can happen. Tissue changes can happen. Okay, let's say we're using estrogen and you stopped, and we look at vaginal tissue. So with the estrogen support you had, your vaginal tissue was healthy. You had good lubrication, secretions, and then you stopped the extra estrogen. Are you going to be dry the next day? No. But over the course of a few months, yes, because you don't have the estrogen you need to maintain that tissue. So a tissue effect will take longer to appear. Mood changes, however, are very quick, and sometimes neurological changes. I had this astounding experience for myself. I was at a conference. It was a pharmacy conference. This man had a lecture in the morning. I attended, and we had a reception later in the evening. I saw him sitting alone, so I went to talk to him. And he was telling me during his lecture in the morning, he was afraid he might fall over because he couldn't feel his feet. And he either had no feelings or he had pain, neuropathy pain in his feet. So, of course, I gave him progesterone, right? So he took some progesterone from me and put it on his feet in the night. And he comes back the next morning. He just marches right up to me and said, "What have you done to me?" And he goes, "I can feel my feet." Just that fast. So quite amazing. Even I was astounded. And his big complaint was later, well, it doesn't last. I go,
Yeah.
it's in and out. You don't, it's not a one dose suits all.
Yeah.
It's just going to do what it does and it's gone.
Yeah.
So it's got its half-life is what, 4 to 6 hours, is that correct?
That's where you're going to have peak time. Half-life actually is more like 12 hours, but you're going,
Oh, it's yeah.
you're peaking in the serum from your dose. And then if you're using topical progesterone, this is another thing that's a problem. Your serum levels when you take it may not budge. And I talked to Dr. Frank Nort, who has a 24-hour urine lab. He says, never measure serum for progesterone. It's just is not moving. It's not accurate. And he said it's because that progesterone quickly leaves the serum and goes all over the place for all the functions it does. So it's very unreliable marker. So he, of course, believes 24-hour urine will give you a better picture, and probably does.
But that's the Dutch, right?
No, he's an opponent of the Dutch, and there's some problems with the Dutch test, and they are very good at marketing. Their testing protocol is not verified by anybody in the scientific literature, so they're making suppositions. They suppose that by having these spots that it's a good reflection of what you would collect over 24 hours. It's not. The owner of the lab, he's even said they use an algorithm. So what if, I think it's 5 spots they take, is it not? Is it 4? So
what, during the day? I'm not quite sure.
yeah. So suppose you had all those numbers and they're all over the place. What would you do with it? So they don't disclose all your numbers. I am working with a medical group, and we're looking at that particular question. Is the Dutch reliable enough for a clinical decision? Does it align with 24-hour urine, which is actually a gold standard for hormone evaluation? And we see some discrepancies on the people who did both. They did the 24-hour urine collection, but sent some of their sample to Dutch, and we get a different picture. So what do you do with that? So what I don't like is that it really puts practitioners at risk who are using this for their clinical decisions. If they have some of their regulatory agents come in and say, why are you using this? Show us your scientific literature to support that this test is good enough for a clinical decision. We don't have that. So it makes me very nervous because just a few doctors being attacked like that by a regulatory agency could topple a lot of stuff with how they look at bioidentical hormone therapies in general. It's
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. When you say 24-hour urine, can you explain that process?
Yeah, you just usually you pick a time, you empty your bladder, and that's time 0, and then you collect everything until the next, like say the next 8 o'clock, and that's your last collection. And you put it all in a container together, and you send an aliquot, just a portion of that, to the lab. You don't send the whole big amount.
So it's mixed together for the whole day, and then you take a sample of that mix and put it into another container and send it off.
Right, and all urine tests are done against the standard creatinine to show that your kidneys are working correctly and not askew. So both Dutch and the traditional 24-hour urine tests do that. But there's also a problem with creatinine does not release in an even manner. It goes up and down too. So if you only have 5 spots, you can't use that as a standard. that
Yeah.
regular 24-hour. So, and then there's the problem with Dutch uses, you pee on a piece of paper and they have to extract it. This is really not solid science, because how do you prove you've extracted everything from that piece of paper? You can't prove a negative. So there's another lab in the US that's doing something similar. They don't use paper. They have you take a little sample from each size. So they've eliminated that big piece of uncertainty that Dutch continues to use. So a lot of doctors really don't understand testing. And it's such a what's the best way to test for hormones becomes the question. And it's impossible. Our hormones, you know very well, like estrogen compartmentalizes. You've got tons of estrogen receptors in your breasts and your uterus, for example. So it does a serum sample, the urine sample, the saliva sample. What's the relationship between the estrogen in your breasts and your estrogen in your muscle tissue? We don't have a clue. No clue. So,
well, unless you do tissue biopsies, you'll never know, will you?
right, and then you got to do them all.
Yeah.
So how?
So you can't. I mean, I know some ladies on the group will look at their estradiol level, and then they'll look at prolactin and say, "Oh, my prolactin's within range. I'm okay." But that's not the full picture, is it? It's not conclusive.
Well, and that prolactin, the stuff about prolactin, I think that came from Ray Peat too, and looking at it as a reflection of your tissue estrogen, your whole body burden of estrogen. I would say it's probably a better marker than taking a serum or a urine or whatever. But it's one of the reasons that prolactin can go up. You really have to make sure that there's no cancer, no tumor on your pituitary, etc. And it also goes up in low thyroid situations. So it's not completely a high estrogen marker, but it is involved in low thyroid too. So how do you do it? So I like the idea of looking at prolactin, and progesterone bring down prolactin in a lot of cases. So I think we should look at it. It might be a more reliable thing to monitor yourself clinically. So if you get progesterone, and if other things aren't involved, you should have a normal prolactin.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Do you routinely test for estrone? Sorry, Jen.
No, that's all right. You go ahead.
Do you routinely test for estrone, Carol, if you're looking at? No,
I think like 99% of what you're doing should be clinical. And we have so much information from the field of biochemistry and physiology, what the particular hormones are doing, that when you learn this and you dive into what the person's feeling. So just yesterday, I had somebody email me a question about their client. She said, "Oh, she took progesterone, she felt horrible." Well, what does horrible mean? We have to sort out exactly what happened when they didn't feel so good. Was it, did their heart pound? Did they have no energy? Did they have brain fog? Each of those things can contribute to the umbrella of horrible, but you've got to sort out. So this is where we have to have information, and we need women to understand what these symptoms mean. And there's a great disconnect. One of the things I see on some Facebook pages, it still persists. We have this thing in our society that estrogen fixes everything, right? If you have any symptom, you must not have enough estrogen. And there's some very determined, I wonder if they're trolls sometimes, just that push this agenda. And they sound good, right? They say, "Oh, I've had all this experience. I've been working clinically in this doctor's office, and we always had estrogen and everything is hunky-dory. And of course, then all the women in the group suffering with these symptoms are saying, oh, I need more estrogen. And of course, it doesn't work. But the vast majority of the people don't get the rest of the story, that somebody went off and increased their estrogen and they had more problems. They may not.
I see that a lot on menopause. I'm only on one menopause page, but I mean, so many people with especially heavy bleeding.
Yeah.
And you know, like, oh, I'm on 100 mcg of estrogen and I've started bleeding and I can't control it. And you sort of, it's almost like a facepalm moment. And, you know, it will transpire that they're on the Mirena coil, or that they're being given 100 milligrams of progesterone to counter all that estrogen.
Yeah.
And it just, and yet you sort of say, look, the reason that you are bleeding so heavily and so badly and for so long is because you're taking too much estrogen. And it's like, you know, like, I don't want to admit that this is the problem, because I've been told that estrogen is the be all and end all. And it's modern, westernized pharmaceutical medicine has done a right job of convincing women that estrogen is the be all and end all. I totally agree on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do we hang on to Premarin? Women are still using Premarin. It's still a very, very well selling drug. For most, something like that should not even be approved, right? You can't really characterize it very well. It's variable. So I found a paper and they identified over 60 steroids in Premarin. And there is some of them are progesterone-like. Horses don't have progesterone, but they do have progesterone-like molecules. And why shouldn't it be in there? Because that horse is pregnant. They would need to have some progesterone-like molecule to keep the pregnancy. So I think a lot of what we think about estrogen, progesterone has been corrupted because of Premarin. Now, we know now progesterone does a great job for hot flashes and vasomotor stuff. So why is it that we're still always talking about estrogen is good for hot flashes? It's probably from Premarin, who got an approval. Their first drug approval was for vasomotor stuff. But was it the estrogen in there, or was it some of the other 59 other things they've identified that help the hot flashes and not the estrogenic ones?
Yeah.
We don't know. And later, what made Premarin so popular, again, marketing, later they got an approval for osteoporosis. And they took that to the moon and back, pushing that story that women were in big danger of having osteoporosis, and their drug was the answer. How good it works, how good the data is that this should be used in the water, for instance, for everybody. We don't have that. So we have this situation, and that estrogen is so stimulant. You kind of like the effects of estrogen.
Yeah.
Once I knew a woman who confessed to me she was using high doses of Premarin, and it wasn't enough for her, she felt, and she would even steal Premarin. You go into the pharmacy because it was such a fast-moving drug, it might be right out there in the counter, and she'd just grab it.
Is she still alive?
I don't know. But so we get this distorted kind of thing. Then there's these articles about oral progesterone does this, increases C-reactive protein and inflammation, fibrinogen, clotting issues, increases sex hormone binding, globulin. Oral does this, but if you use topical, it's less so. So you should always use estrogen on the skin. Well, you look at the study, the oral is Premarin. The topical is always estradiol, whether it be a patch or gel, whatever. So this is not good science. How does this crap get published? If you're looking at something, you should have oral estradiol versus topical estradiol. And no reason we can't have oral estradiol being looked at, because it's been approved for hormone therapy for many, many years. So I spent a long time looking at for something that was doing oral estradiol versus topical estradiol. I did find a couple studies, and it was like they were pretty identical, or maybe a slight tendency with the oral, but not like we see with Premarin. So we're really looking at Premarin versus a topical estradiol, not estradiol versus estradiol. I even tried to call the drug company that's making Estrace oral tablets, and they gave me one of their clinical physician experts, and I couldn't be more disappointed. She didn't have a clue what I meant for what I'm trying to get from her. Like, what studies have you done with estradiol orally that I haven't found yet that shows that maybe the sex hormone binding globulin doesn't go up as much as Premarin? We don't have that. So we have this mantra like, oh, you have to have estradiol on the skin and you have to have progesterone orally, is kind of the convention that's evolved from all of that. And I don't know that it's true at all. It's another urban myth, maybe.
Is it an urban myth that oral progesterone in the form of prometrium or eutrogestin, once it, obviously there's the first pass through the liver via the digestive system. I've always quoted the numbers between 10 and 30% absorption, and you find that people that do take it that way can suffer from anxiety or gut issues or a few other things. What's your view on that versus, say, vaginal or rectal application?
First of all, let's define what it means, avoiding the first liver pass, which you described pretty well. But the bottom line, it's a technique that increases the blood level of whatever you're trying to get into your body temporarily by avoiding the oral route, which goes to the liver first. How long does that protect you, or how long does that have an effect? It can be under 90 seconds. And it's at your liver, and your liver's doing what the liver is going to do with that hormone. So it's a method to intensify the effect of whatever it is you're using. So for example, if you're using progesterone and you put the progesterone on your breasts, if you have tender breasts, the concentration very temporarily in the bloodstream there will be higher than it'll be to the rest of your body. But we're talking a very, very short period of time before it gets to your liver and to be metabolized out. There's also evidence to show that progesterone's a fat in the fat family, or all of the steroids are absorbed by fats, and they're picked up by chylomicrons and taken into the lymph system. This is normal absorption for anything fatty you eat. So it's not necessarily all broken down by the digestive tract. It's shunted into this other system. And if you deliver progesterone orally with oil, with a fatty meal, more definitely is going into this lymphatic type system, which doesn't break down progesterone as predicted. If you had just progesterone in an oral capsule with no oil, or no oil that you're taking with it, maybe then you do get some more digestive breakdown. And what the percentage is, I think it's really difficult to put numbers on it, because it's going to be different for each and every individual. But I don't like to use oral progesterone when there's a disturbed microbiome. I think it makes it worse. And then some percentage, and we don't know what percentage of women, and it's been attributed to allopregnanolone as the metabolite that makes you very, very drowsy and groggy. Once I saw a study, 10 women taking oral progesterone, only one had the dizziness, drowsiness out of the 10. And they were associating that with the allopregnanolone. She had more than the other 9. And early on, working with Women's International Pharmacy, we were doing oral progesterone all the time. It was a long time before we even put a warning for dizziness, drowsiness. For the most part, women were not. But it doesn't mean that some women don't have a big problem. So our advice when that was happening was to use a different dosage form, use vaginal, use rectal, use topical, use sublingual, however else, to avoid making all that allopregnanolone.
Okay. Right, okay. Does low ferritin have anything to do with the body's ability to use progesterone?
Low ferritin? Oh. There's where I need to do a rabbit hole. Iron metabolism is very, very complicated, and the worst situation is high ferritin. And how high should it be? It's really an inflammatory molecule, ferritin is. And there is even some supposition that what we think that it's a carrier for iron, that it's not necessarily that, which further confuses me. So personally, I've had issues with high ferritin, inflammatory issues. I don't know what units you're using in the UK, but I have seen things like 10 to 40, and ferritin was ideal. And yet that's low enough that some doctors will say you need iron. But look more toward what's happening with the hemoglobin, hematocrit. Are you making enough red blood cells with the iron you have? As that should be a primary. So low ferritin doesn't bother me. Whether progesterone has an effect, that's a very good question. I think I'll take a look.
Okay, this is an interesting one. So on Geraldine Pryor's Semcor website, there's a question and answer section. Someone asks about using natural progesterone for endometriosis suppression. Dr. Pryor's recommendation is to use 300 milligrams orally and 300 milligrams vaginally to achieve cycle suppression. Because this amount will suppress estrogen, she recommends only for 6 months with the use of various supplements for bone density, etc. My understanding is that keeping our cycles is broadly a good thing, and suppressing the cycle may cause other issues. Since many still with a cycle are using high doses of progesterone, what is Carol's opinion about this in terms of using too much progesterone and therefore suppressing estrogen? Could this be the reason for issues of low mood, particularly? That's going back to the question that Jen brought up about using too much and the sort of suppressed mood, I suppose.
Yeah, one very interesting thing to bring up with, she's got 600 milligrams every day, and you're going to suppress ovulation with that. And Katerina Dalton did suggest some suppression of ovulation too as birth control. And progesterone could be used as birth control if you indeed suppress ovulation. And the trouble with it is, again, progesterone has so much work to do and could be diverted any place that you could lose that function very easily in a high stress situation. Say you're doing fine. But once at Women's, we had a woman who said she used 400 milligrams of progesterone every day as birth control in her life. And she stopped twice, had 2 healthy babies, and just kept going on. But nobody's going to take that up. It's too risky to say that's going to work all the time. And for endometriosis, some of the cycle stuff, this is why they give birth control pills for it. So I don't know that Jerry Lynn Pryor knows about the connection with Candida and endometriosis. So we have that piece missing when you're talking about just suppressing ovulation. Yes, extra progesterone will help you, but there's this underlying Candida problem with endometriosis going on that needs to be addressed. And I'm trying to, anybody with endometriosis, I always warn them that they should go on some sort of anti-Candida program first before they start progesterone. There's maybe some techniques you can use to not need as much progesterone, such as vitamin E or adding pregnenolone, rather than as much progesterone. But you have to be aware that you could have worsening of the Candida situation, and you need to know what to do if that's coming up. So if it's coming up, you really need to reinstate your anti-Candida program, or you need to intensify it to keep that under control. So it's touchy. Endometriosis is touchy. Once I had a woman tell me she used progesterone in higher doses in her luteal phase. With her endometriosis, her endometrium lining had built up so much that her doctor wanted just to do surgery. And she wanted to save her uterus. So she was taking 400 milligrams every day, but she said, I'm going to be in my bed the whole time because I want to get this shed. I don't want to lose my uterus, but I'm willing to have no life for the couple of weeks you're going to do this. So it's very, very complicated. Dr. Pryor, and I love her dearly, and she's like my hero, and I got to meet her and hang around, and I've been to her house for Thanksgiving and stuff like that. She knows what she studies.
Yeah.
The absolute what she studies, and she's so particular, like this estrogen kickback thing. I'm telling her about that, and she thinks it's unbelievable because she starts everybody at 300 milligrams, so she hardly ever sees that, right? She doesn't see what these women with 20 milligram over-the-counter cream are getting palpitations. She absolutely doesn't see that. So she doesn't see that, and so she doesn't know the full gamut of what women are experiencing.
Sorry, I listened to her ovulatory disturbance just recently in the last week, and she sort of attributed a lot of the things that we would attribute to kickback to the trough that estrogen causes, sort of the decline of progesterone, but then estrogen, because it does this sort of like peak and trough. She attributed what we would say would be estrogen kickback or low estrogen or low progesterone symptoms at the bottom of the trough. She attributes that to low estrogen, and that was the one thing that I couldn't quite get my head around, because to me those things are because we don't have enough progesterone, not because we don't have enough estrogen. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I don't know. Did she say that she measured this with going to blood levels, or?
No, I think, well, you listened to it too, Gemma. Do you remember?
I can't remember, but I think that this last question is more getting to that point, actually, in respects of, I think the question is, if 600 milligrams of progesterone suppresses the cycle, therefore suppressing estrogen production and potentially something about the is it dampening mood effectively because you're suppressing estrogen through suppressing suppressing the cycle.
Yeah, does it affect your mood, and is positive or negative? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we have enough research on that particular kind of situation.
Is it really suppressing estrogen though? Because it's not really supposed to. It's supposed to oppose estrogen. Progesterone doesn't reduce estrogen, does it? It just opposes it. It's not, I mean, Ray Peat would say that progesterone is vital for discharging estrogen from cells. So if you sort of go by his thinking, then how is it reducing estrogen? It isn't. It's actually putting more estrogen into the system and the blood circulation.
Yeah. And the particular newsletter, and I haven't heard him talk about it, so maybe I missed something, but I did go back to this newsletter that he wrote, and he said about when progesterone is high, the tissue estrogen is low. Okay, so what was his reference? So look at the reference. The reference was the endometrium. So then I thought, well, is it just the endometrium? Does this occur throughout the body? Is it in the brain? In the same thing? We don't have that. And I'm a little alarmed that people took this up as a mantra, that increasing progesterone depletes the tissue estrogen like all over. And that's one of its activities. I don't know. I don't think we really know the whole answer there. So I'd rather not think of it as a blanket thing. We do know from the study it was the endometrium, but is it happening everywhere? I don't know.
Yeah.
But you bring up another good thing, which I started to look at, and I said this, I've said that myself, like estrogen receptors are intensified, sensitized by progesterone. So I started looking for some data on that, and then I can't find it. And it doesn't mean it's not there. Again, you can't prove the negative, but is that the real mechanism of action, or is it something else? And Jen, I like what you said, because we have these diametrically opposing activities of these various hormones. Is it that function which seems to be the thing, and not necessarily the so-called receptors for estrogen, progesterone, etc.? We know progesterone, like its activity to be transferred down into the corticosteroid pathway, making more hydrocortisone. This is not receptor stuff. It's different stuff. So I don't know that we know this clearly. So
yeah. I mean, certainly since I've started taking it, I'm flatlined now. I mean, I hardly ever get upset about anything. And I literally used to just be a raging mess. And it's not like my lifestyle has changed so that I don't have those things produced to me anymore. But now I'm much more capable of dealing with it. And that's solely because of progesterone. I don't take anything else. Well, I mean, I take vitamins, but I don't take any other hormone or anything else. So I can only say that it's the progesterone that has helped me deal with stress. And when I used to take the birth control pill, I was a mess. I couldn't, I spent my whole life feeling like I was depressed. I was always on edge. I was always snapping at everything. And the polar opposites between progestins and the inability to deal with stress and what progesterone makes me like in dealing with stress now is just amazing. And I mean, there's that whole thing about the cortisol steal and all that sort of stuff. But I have ample progesterone, and if I get stressed, I just take a little bit more because I know I'm in a stressful situation. But obviously we're always going to prioritize cortisol over the progesterone that we need for our menstrual cycle and all those sorts of things, because cortisol is life.
Right.
But it's I don't quite know where I was going with that one, but I just
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And you do become in tune with what your body needs as well with that, don't you? When you are extra stressed, you know that your body's demanding more progesterone from you. It's just something that you do become in tune with.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. my daughter is in chemical menopause, so we might have covered this previously, but we are now early weeks into progesterone therapy method, and we are seeing some small improvements, but we won't know for sure how successful this treatment has been for a few months yet. My question, if it is successful and we see an improvement in mood and cognition, what, if any, is the role of chemical menopause in her treatment going forward? Obviously, it is there at the moment to suppress hormonal fluctuations, but in theory, if her issue has always been chronic progesterone deficiency and that is addressed, I wonder if the symptom of hormone fluctuation, and only a symptom, not a cause, would also disappear, and the need for chemical menopause would become redundant, which I think we have covered, haven't we, previously?
I think so. One of the things with withdrawing, you have a time frame where it's becoming less and less and less effective. You're going to know if the progesterone you have on board is adequate during that time frame. So it should be much easier to keep on top of it and use what you need. And this transition from blocking to non-blocking. Plus, now you've blocked estrogen for a while, and whether you've used it or used some or not used some, you have more tools. You know what you're supposed to feel like. You know how good progesterone can help you feel. So as this transition is happening, it's something just to pay attention to. And I think you can make it quite smooth by having all this progesterone over the time that this has been working. You put in the progesterone, and now you have much more better control of the situation. Plus you have the education, like what are your tools? I had one client who had pellets, which we haven't talked about. She had estrogen and testosterone pellets. And so on the pellet therapy, and even having stopped the pellet therapy, she'd been bleeding for 9 months. And so her intention was not to get more pellets, but she wanted to transition to creams, I think is what she wanted to do. So first order of business is to stop the bleeding, right? So she I think 800, 900 milligrams of topical cream. She was able to stop the bleeding. And then she said to me, and on top of this, her mood improved tremendously. She had been really high strung, and now she's like calm, smiling. You can even see this on a Zoom call, how radically changed women can be. And then she goes, I think I need some estrogen. So now she's like, like 6 months after her last pellets. And I said, I think you probably do. And I said, I think she had the patch and she wanted to put a patch on. I said, go ahead, but you know what to do. It could cause bleeding again. But as soon as you spot that, you know to up your progesterone. You have the tools you need. What's the quality of your vaginal tissue for the estrogen is a big thing. So she now has the tools, and that's what women need to have. They need to know what to expect from the hormones that they're using and how to adjust. And doctors need to be training. And now we have a lot of people like you two are coaching women on this information. They need to have it. They need to be in charge of themselves and not give it away to some doctor who says, take 100 milligrams of progesterone at bedtime and see me in 6 months. It's not working.
I think that just in itself, I mean, I see it daily on menopause pages of, oh, my doctor put me up to 100 micrograms of estrogen, and I've been bleeding like a stuck pig. But they then,
and the answer to that is a hysterectomy.
and or, oh well, we can't control the bleeding, so you better have a Mirena coil. And I'm like, you're taking too much estrogen. That is the only way that your body has to tell you that it is. Well, one of the only ways. If you're getting extra heavy bleeding and you're taking a shed load of estrogen, then it's the estrogen's fault. Like just reduce the estrogen, and you might. But they totally and utterly trust the doctor, and I'm like, and I've had I've had admins on those pages sort of say, well, you're not a doctor, you shouldn't be telling people what to do. And I'm like, well, their doctors clearly aren't telling them what to do because they haven't got a clue. So, you know, at the end of the day, you are in charge of your own body. You know your body, but there are a lot of people out there that can't do it without a doctor telling them what to do, and it's just very sad because we haven't. I mean, we call it the Davina effect, don't we? Where literally she's written this book with a prominent doctor in the UK, and it's all about estrogen and how much estrogen you should be taking, and estrogen solves all problems. And there's not much of a mention of progesterone. Yeah. And should you suggest that people take higher than recommended amounts of progesterone, you're a snake oil salesman. And you know, it does
highlight how, as women, we don't understand the mechanisms of our own menstrual cycle, and that education is just severely lacking.
Yeah. I'd love to be able to go into schools and do, you know, to teenagers and give them the physiological effects of what happens when. And so we're educating our young people about this and not sending them off to doctors who just basically, they've got, you know, like me, when I was a kid at 13, I had excruciatingly heavy and painful periods. And I was put on the birth control pill. And that started my journey of hormone imbalance. And I mean, I've got 2 daughters and they are really rather up with the whole thing. Neither of them want to take the birth control pill. But when my youngest daughter was about 14, she went through a terrible period of being excruciatingly moody and slamming doors and screaming and all sorts of other things. You know, but some mothers are faced with that and they just march them off down to the doctor, and the doctor puts them on the birth control pill, which is the worst thing that could ever happen, you know. So just letting their cycles sort of develop and mature, which is what I did, along with a few diet changes, is better than the chemicals that you're going to introduce to them. So yeah, definitely.
There was this writer, Susan Dominus, wrote for the New York Times, and they had a big article on menopause written by her. It was like the Sunday edition, which had a magazine edition, so it was really a lengthy article. So she herself, very famous writer, and her colleagues, getting to be in their menopausal time and having trouble with their mind. They can't communicate. They can't think of words to say. In fact, one of her friends quit writing because her brain wasn't working. So what does Susan Dominus do? She goes to all the big medical centers, NYU, Columbia, whatever, and they get, you know, they tell her about all this plethora of hormone treatments, most 99% of it synthetic, and she finally makes her choice for herself, and she chooses birth control pills, which was alarming. I do a radio show that's out of New York City. For 2 weeks in a row, we were talking about how Susan Dominus missed the boat in her investigating reporting, because there are a lot of doctors in the New York City area that do bioidentical hormones. Not a word of it in her article. But what was alarming on top of this, she was saying that doctors who are in training at these big medical centers in New York City no longer are being taught anything about menopause because they think there's nothing they can do about it. And that was staggering.
But also, I think, obviously it differs if someone is surgically menopausal at the age of 38. But I honestly think that it's now been made into a disease, and it's not a disease, is it? It's just a change in the way that we make and process our hormones and our diet. You know, like as we age, our glucose system changes as well. And I mean, I'm not saying that you should be able to go through it without any HRT, or that you know, I'm not a purist, but I think that the fact that it's now been classified as a disease, almost, well, not only is it earning the pharmaceutical companies huge amounts of money, it's changed the mindset of women that
there's something wrong.
Yeah, that there's something wrong with them. Instead of it, I mean, I've heard you talk on your radio show, Carol, about how it's something that we should cherish, and you know, those sorts of issues aren't a disease. That, you know, they're just, it's life. And yes, do we need some form of HRT? I mean, I'm 54, I'm still bleeding, still got my womb, and all I use is progesterone at the moment, because I haven't had any other symptoms that would necessarily mean that I need estrogen. So I'm not saying I'll never take it, but you know, I'm doing okay. So
yeah.
There's another facet, and I belong to some groups in aging medicine. The A4M, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. Actually, I've been working on this forum with them. If you want to go on that forum and put issues out, we're hoping that practitioners and people will engage on that forum. It's forum.worldhealth.net, and anybody can come in and post questions or post things. We want to make it worldwide. We don't have, as it happens, you know, we don't have access to worldwide information. I had a client who was from New York City. She was Russian, and she told me that she has to go through contortions with her computer to get Russian news, but Russian medical stuff has other facets that she's not getting when she logs in as an English speaker. It just is not available to her. So we have the whole world has all this human ingenuity going on, and we can't tap into it. So, for example, when Gemma reached out to me, I had no idea how entrenched this PMDD system had gotten. It just blew me away, because I thought it'd be a failure, because progesterone works. Why are you going to go into all these drugs? But medical industry. And how did you get to a place where family practitioners are told they can only prescribe 200 milligrams, no matter what? How did this happen? And what are people in other countries doing? It would be good to know, because we probably have more tools than we know.
Yeah. Well, I've got people that whose doctors won't even test their progesterone. They won't test it.
This is because I suppose we're so reliant on the NHS and the treatment guidelines that we're kind of blinded to the functional medicine side, especially in the UK. I think we're very dependent upon the NHS. Yeah,
and people are so used to not paying for it that the thought of paying for it. And you know, there's quite a large population of people that can't afford to pay for it. So where are they left? They're left in a system that isn't helping them, that's harming them in many respects. I mean, the whole thing about the prolactin and the mood, risperidone or something, that basically increased prolactin so badly that the poor woman had, you know, multiple prolactinomias. All from being on a mood enhancer when she should have been prescribed progesterone. You know, or a mood stabilizer, when she should have been prescribed progesterone instead. And yet they'll hand out the mood stabilizers that are incredibly harmful. But if you go to the doctor and ask, and this is the case in most GP surgeries, if you say, I've got severe PMS or PMDD, I'd like to give progesterone a go, they will say, well, I'm sorry, that's not in the guidelines, so I can't give you that, but here's this nice mini pill that we'll give you instead. And I mean, I had a fight with my doctor just recently. I went off and I said, look, you know, I've got some excess, some my PMD symptoms are coming back slightly. Is there any chance I could have the double the dose that I'm on? And she couldn't do that. She had to write to the consultant, who I lucked out completely getting on the NHS. I mean, I could have got somebody that basically denied me, but she was a bit old school, and she said, oh yes, no, of course you can have that. Yeah, I can completely see from your reproductive history that that you've got a problem with estrogen and you blah blah. So she had to write to her for the okay to give me 400 milligrams of progesterone. And I count myself very, very lucky, because there's a large majority of women on both our groups that can't get it for love nor money. It's wrong. So wrong.
And Carol, why is there no restrictions in some countries?
Yeah.
Why are you allowed to prescribe as much as required for an individual?
Who knows? But if you get in the US, if you get into like a medical system, like Kaiser Permanente is a big one, you can run into the same restrictions. Oh, I'll give you an example. There was a young woman she was going every month. She was going for a blood transfusion. She was bleeding so heavily. And we, of course, knew progesterone would help. But every month, what was happening at the hospital, they would tell her to use birth control pills in bigger doses, like 3 or 4 of them. And you know how estrogenic that is. So they were setting her up for the next blood transfusion. So she stopped bleeding. It took 1,700 milligrams of, she ended up in lozenges, and she stopped that heavy bleeding. But she was very young, and she was very close to hysterectomy because of that, and they were inducing it.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
It's so wrong.
There's a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah.
Work.
Do you want to wrap it up, and maybe we can get together some other time?
Yeah, really good.
Chat again, just because it is going on now, isn't it, for
Yes.
a couple of hours.
We'll lose interest.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
thank you for your time, both of you. It's been great.
And you two are doing amazing work.
Thank you. And you too.
So it's so good. People, as annoying as Facebook is, it's become a resource, and women are helping each other, even sometimes.
Yeah.
But there's an avenue we can work in. So it's
a really good thing.
As long as they don't start censoring us, which is a bit of a worry. But
it is a bit of a worry. And then you have to go someplace else, like Rumble, Substack. People are going all over the place.
Yeah.
And maybe start having these alternatives already ready to go.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying your YouTube lectures, actually, the last couple of days.
So I had this opportunity to work with this group, and they're kind of out there trying to find solutions to chronic problems that we've been ignoring. And they're not necessarily a natural group, because I was putting together this lecture, because what they were like wanting to focus on is aromatase inhibition and what drugs can be used and stuff like that, and doses and what evidence do we have, and it irritated me so so much. But I knew I had plenty for a lecture if they were willing to hear it. And then one of the guys that organizes this in another medical group doing something similar. It's interesting. There are medical groups out there that are meeting privately and doing stuff, and I'm sure that's gone on forever. Little groups of doctors that meet privately and discuss what's working and what's not working. They're out there. So I was able to tap into this one, and I don't want them to go to like aromatase inhibition is everything, and not to forget that progesterone should be the thing. And there's one doctor in the US, Neil Rousier, he says flat out men should not use supplemental progesterone, although a lot of what else he teaches is quite good. And he's crazy. And I went to one of his things and I talked to him, and he goes, well, this study, blah, blah, blah. There's a little amount from the testes for progesterone, but there's a lot from the adrenals, and you're completely ignoring this. And Michael Platt also wrote someplace 300 milligrams of progesterone can help shrink swollen prostates. So there are so many men suffering with this that it's so appalling. I had another doctor, sorry, he's passed away, but he relied on muscle testing. And so I told him about Dr. Platt's suggestion. He talked to Dr. Platt, and he started doing this with his men patients. He was doing muscle testing too. They tested for the extra progesterone. They did really well. And I asked him about sexual stuff, because they say, oh, men can't have progesterone because it's going to suppress their testosterone. They're not going to be able to have erections or sexual interest. I said, do you have any sexual complaints about your men that you've put on higher dose of progesterone? He goes, no, absolutely nothing. So where does this stuff come from? Where does this stuff come from? But if you look at the structure of progesterone, there's a pretty intricate thing with progesterone and testosterone. They're very similar in structure. If you look at the structures between the two of them, they're as closely related as any two molecules in that whole cascade. So there's probably a lot of cross stuff going on with progesterone and testosterone. We haven't explored that. And
yeah.
I was reading a book on menopause written by an OBGYN. She's from Edmonton, I think. And I was so annoyed with her because every little bit she takes to men bashing. And I said, men are suffering with this hormone stuff just as much as women. So, it's kind of cruel that you're doing this all the time. Oh, it's so much better for men. They don't do it. It's not.
Well, there's higher instances of testicular cancers, and prostates are going wild, and
yeah,
it's all caused by stress, the environment, the pollution that we put into our bodies, the fact that you might live next to a power line, all sorts of things that it's not. Everybody's got it,
Yes.
Fluoride, even fluoride in the water.
Yes.
It's everything. I mean, if we lived back in the 1930s, I think we probably would have. Well, obviously, it's everything has increased, and it's not just because we record it more. Is it? It's all the population is growing, so therefore it's all relevant. I think, I don't know, Gemma, do you know what the incidence of cancer is at the moment? Is it 1 in 5 or 1 in 3 or something?
Yeah, I think it's lower. I think it's 1 in
3. What? Yeah.
Most cancers are driven by estrogen.
Yeah.
Aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
In some way, shape or form.
Yeah. I don't think necessarily caused by estrogen, but it drives the growth.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Right. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We'll do another one again
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like that.
soon.
It's great. And I'll put it on my social media and come on the forum too.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll
That would be lovely.
engage some practitioners that don't know what a big problem this is.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, really
Thank you
good.
so much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to
Thank
see
you.
again. Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.
Let's see.